The sky was on fire. It wasn't the kind of sunset humanity had admired for centuries. It was the death of a world. Giant alien warships loomed above Earth, their metallic hulls reflecting the flames consuming the cities below. The attack had come without warning. One moment, humanity was thriving, exploring the stars with dreams of a united future. The next, those dreams were shattered under the relentless bombardment of the Zorvax Dominion. Their weapons were beyond anything Earth's defenses could withstand. Massive energy blasts rained down from orbit, reducing entire continents to molten wastelands. Skyscrapers crumbled, oceans boiled, and the screams of billions were lost in the chaos. Military forces fought back with everything they had: jets, missiles, even nuclear warheads, but nothing could pierce the shields of the invaders. Humanity, for all its strength and intelligence, was utterly powerless. In the middle of the destruction, a lone command bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains was still operational. Inside, Admiral Ethan Graves stood before a flickering holographic display, watching as every major city fell one by one. London, gone. Beijing, obliterated. Moscow, nothing but ruins. Even the United States' strongest military installations had been reduced to craters. He clenched his fists as the desperate voices of commanders filled the room. "They're everywhere," a pilot shouted over the comms. "We can't even get close." The transmission cut off with a scream, followed by static. Another voice, this one from a ground unit, begged for reinforcements that would never come. "Sir, we need silence." One by one, the voices of Earth's defenders disappeared. The realization hit like a hammer: they were losing. Not in hours. Not in days. In minutes. Beyond the bunker, civilians ran through the streets, trying to escape the inferno engulfing their world. Mothers shielded their children, fathers fought to defend their families, and soldiers, armed with nothing but rifles, fired hopelessly at the massive alien walkers marching through the rubble. The Zorvax did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They had come for one reason: to erase humanity from existence. Their fleet had wiped out entire civilizations before, and now Earth was just another target on their path of conquest. But if the Zorvax thought humanity would simply die without a fight, they were wrong. As Earth burned, a handful of ships managed to launch from hidden bases, carrying the last survivors of the human race. They were not world leaders or politicians. They were soldiers, scientists, and engineers. People who understood that survival was the only option. Admiral Graves was among them, his heart heavy as he watched Earth shrink behind him, swallowed by the flames of war. He wanted to fight, to turn back and die alongside his people, but he knew the truth: this war was not over. Humanity had lost a battle, not the war. They would return. They would rebuild. And one day, the Zorvax would know the same fear they had inflicted on Earth. The last human ships vanished into deep space. The Zorvax leader stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the ruins of Earth with satisfaction. "It is done," he said. "The humans are no more." But he was wrong. The embers of humanity still burned. And from those embers, a fire would rise, one that would consume the galaxy. Deep in the cold void of space, far from the watchful eyes of the Zorvax Dominion, humanity clung to survival. The few who had escaped the burning of Earth had found refuge in the shattered remains of abandoned space stations, forgotten asteroid fields, and hidden planetary outposts. They were not rulers anymore. They were not a mighty civilization. They were refugees, ghosts drifting in the darkness. Yet, in that darkness, something stronger than fear began to grow: a hunger for vengeance. Humanity had lost everything, but they had not lost their will to fight. They would not be remembered as victims. They would not fade into history as another extinct race. They would rise. The survivors worked without rest, scavenging what little they could from the ruins of old battlefields and forgotten wrecks. Engineers turned scraps of metal into weapons, mechanics rebuilt damaged ships into war machines, and scientists studied stolen Zorvax technology, learning how to use the enemy's own strength against them. What they could not match in numbers, they would make up for in ingenuity and ruthlessness. Every man, woman, and child played a role. There were no civilians anymore, only warriors. The young learned to fight before they could even speak fluently. The old taught the mistakes of the past, ensuring they would never be repeated. The weak were hardened by fire and suffering until they became strong. The turning point came when a Zorvax patrol fleet, hunting for any remnants of humanity, stumbled upon what appeared to be an abandoned asteroid field. Confident in their victory, they did not expect resistance. They did not expect to be hunted. Silent and unseen, human ships, modified freighters, and stolen enemy vessels drifted through the debris. The Zorvax were arrogant, believing their superior technology made them untouchable. That arrogance cost them their lives. Hidden railguns tore through their hulls before they even knew they were under attack. EMP bursts shut down their shields, leaving them helpless against the swarm of human fighters that descended upon them. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, the Zorvax fleet was gone, their ships stripped for parts, their weapons added to humanity's growing arsenal. It was the first real victory since Earth had fallen. Word spread through the hidden colonies like wildfire. For the first time in years, there was hope. If a handful of human ships could destroy a Zorvax patrol, what else could they do? Could they strike a supply line? Could they sabotage a Zorvax station? Could they, one day, take back what was stolen from them? The answer was clear yes, but they could not act blindly. If they wanted to win, they needed strategy. They needed patience. They needed to become something more than mere survivors. They needed to become the architects of the Zorvax downfall. Admiral Ethan Graves stood before the gathered leaders of the resistance, his voice calm but filled with fire. "We cannot match them in size, but we can make them bleed," he declared. "We will not fight like an empire. We will fight like a storm, striking before they can react, disappearing before they can retaliate. We will turn their arrogance into their weakness, their strength into their downfall." His words became the foundation of the Retribution Doctrine, a strategy of precision warfare designed to tear apart the Zorvax dominion piece by piece. No more reckless attacks. No more desperate battles. Every move would be calculated. Every strike would have a purpose. The next targets were chosen carefully. Small outposts were hit first, their defenses overwhelmed before they could even send distress signals. Weapon depots were raided, supply convoys hijacked. Each attack was a lesson, each victory a test of their growing strength. They adapted faster than the Zorvax could react, learning from every encounter. They stole enemy ships, refitted them with human modifications, and sent them back into battle. They turned Zorvax communication codes against them, feeding false information and luring enemy fleets into ambushes. The Zorvax, once so sure of their superiority, began to panic. Reports of the ghosts of Earth spread across the Dominion. Then came the first true test of their strength. A Zorvax battleship, the Varkesh, detected human activity near a remote ice world. Unlike the smaller patrols, this ship was a monster heavily armored, shielded, and armed with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. If humanity could defeat it, they would prove they were no longer a minor threat. If they failed, their rebellion might die before it truly began. The trap was set. A distress signal was sent, mimicking the calls of a stranded Zorvax vessel. The Varkesh responded, moving in cautiously. But the moment it entered orbit, the ice below cracked, revealing hidden missile silos buried beneath the surface. The first volley struck before the Zorvax could raise their shields. Engines were crippled, weapons disabled. Before they could recover, human strike teams boarded the ship, moving through the corridors like ghosts. The battle inside was brutal, but the Zorvax had never fought enemies so determined, so desperate. By the time the dust settled, the Varkesh was no longer a Zorvax battleship. It had a new crew, a new purpose. It belonged to humanity now. The war had changed. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. The galaxy had not yet realized its mistake. The Zorvax believed that by destroying Earth, they had erased humanity from existence, but they had only ensured their own doom. The survivors had not died in the cold emptiness of space. They had not withered away in hiding. They had evolved. No longer a fragile species bound to a single world, humanity had become something new, a force forged in fire, shaped by war, and driven by a singular purpose. They had learned the secrets of the enemy's technology, mastered the art of deception, and turned the Zorvax's own arrogance against them. What was once a scattered resistance had now become an unstoppable war machine, one that operated without mercy and without hesitation. The galaxy did not yet know it, but the age of humanity had begun. The first phase of the war was fought in the shadows. Human strike teams moved like ghosts, slipping past enemy patrols, dismantling supply lines, and crippling communication networks. The Zorvax, for all their advanced technology, had never faced an enemy like this one that struck without warning and disappeared without a trace. Entire fleets were left blind as their navigation systems were hacked and their star maps rewritten. Military outposts fell in the dead of night, their security systems disabled before they could even sound the alarm. It was a war of patience, of intelligence, of striking where it hurt the most. The Zorvax High Command dismissed it as nothing more than minor insurgencies, the last desperate gasps of a defeated species. They could not see the storm forming on the horizon. Then, humanity stopped hiding. The time for small victories was over. The first real test of their strength came when the Zorvax fortress world of Korvath was marked for destruction. This planet was more than just a military hub. It was a symbol of the Dominion's power, a world where fleets were built, where weapons were designed, where wars were planned. If it fell, it would send a message across the stars. Humanity was no longer prey. The attack began with deception. Zorvax's long-range sensors detected what appeared to be a scattered fleet of damaged human vessels limping toward the planet. Believing them to be remnants of a failed raid, the planetary defenses prepared to wipe them out. But the moment the first Zorvax ships moved to engage, hidden human warships decloaked from the darkness of space, launching a devastating barrage that crippled the orbital defenses in minutes. The battle had begun, and the Zorvax were not ready. Drop pods rained from the sky, carrying battle-hardened human warriors onto the surface. They were not like the soldiers of the past. They had been trained in the hardest conditions, forged in the fires of suffering and loss. Their weapons were no longer primitive human designs, but enhanced hybrids, Zorvax energy rifles, modified for human hands, armor reinforced with stolen alien alloys. They fought with precision, each move calculated, each bullet fired with purpose. Zorvax forces tried to counterattack, sending waves of mechanized walkers and shock troops, but they were met with something the Dominion had never encountered before: human adaptability. The soldiers of Earth were not bound by rigid tactics or programmed strategies. They improvised, they adapted, and they overcame. As the battle raged, Admiral Ethan Graves stood aboard the HFY Revenant, the stolen Zorvax battleship, now serving as the spearhead of the human war fleet. His eyes were locked on the battlefield below, watching as explosions tore through the once impenetrable Zorvax fortifications. The plan was working. Humanity was no longer just fighting back, they were winning. The Zorvax governor of Korvath, panicked and desperate. Reinforcements would arrive in hours, maybe minutes. But humanity was ready. As the signal was transmitted, hidden human code embedded within it turned the request for help into a false alert, misdirecting the Zorvax armada to an empty sector of space. By the time they realized the trick, Korvath had fallen. The news spread across the Dominion like wildfire. The impossible had happened. A species they had considered extinct had crushed one of their strongest military worlds. Fear gripped the Zorvax leadership. They ordered every fleet, every soldier, every resource to be dedicated to hunting down the human threat. But the harder they searched, the deeper into the shadows humanity slipped. For every Zorvax fleet sent out, another supply station fell. For every world they fortified, another command center was wiped out. It was a war they had no idea how to fight. The Dominion's forces were built for overwhelming superiority, for crushing enemies with brute force. But how do you fight an enemy you can't see? How do you defeat a force that doesn't play by the rules? And then, humanity unleashed the next phase of their war machine. The stolen technology was no longer just being used for survival, it was being perfected. Human engineers had not only learned how Zorvax ships functioned, they had improved them. The first fleet of human-designed warships was unveiled, sleek and deadly, blending the best of human ingenuity with the most advanced alien engineering. Faster, stronger, and more adaptable than anything the Dominion had ever built, these ships marked the beginning of the real war. Humanity was no longer fighting with stolen scraps. They were building their own weapons of annihilation. The first test of this new fleet came when the Zorvax home system itself was raided. A fleet of human warships, armed with devastating new weaponry, struck at the heart of the Dominion's power. They did not stay to conquer, they came to send a message. Massive space stations were reduced to debris, key supply depots turned to dust. Then, as quickly as they arrived, the human fleet vanished, leaving nothing but ruins in their wake. The Zorvax High Command, once so confident in their supremacy, now faced a reality they had never imagined. Humanity was no longer just a scattered resistance, no longer a minor nuisance. They were a rising empire. The Dominion had tried to wipe them out, but in doing so, they had created something far more dangerous, a species with nothing to lose, nothing to fear, and no limits to how far they would go. The war was no longer about revenge. It was about dominance. Humanity had returned, and this time, they would not stop until the stars belonged to them. The Zorvax Dominion had ruled the galaxy for centuries, their power unquestioned, their fleets unmatched. They had crushed countless civilizations, erased entire species, and stood at the peak of galactic dominance. But in their arrogance, they made a fatal mistake. They had tried to destroy humanity. What they believed to be the final extinction of a weak and insignificant species had instead created something far worse, an enemy that refused to die, an enemy that learned, adapted, and struck back with a vengeance unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The war that followed had torn through the Dominion like wildfire, burning their fleets, shattering their strongholds, and exposing the weaknesses they had never thought possible. And now, after years of battle, after endless destruction, only one thing remained: the final strike. Humanity had fought for survival, then for revenge, but now they fought for victory. The war was no longer about balance or power. It was about ending the Dominion forever. The last great bastion of Zorvax power stood on their homeworld, Vorexal, a planet that had never seen invasion, never known defeat. It was a fortress world, surrounded by defense platforms, shielded by energy barriers, and guarded by the remnants of the once mighty Dominion fleet. To the Zorvax, it was an unbreakable wall. But to humanity, it was the final battlefield. The human war machine had grown beyond anything the Dominion had expected. Their fleets were no longer a scattered force of stolen ships and salvaged weapons. They were a storm of destruction, armed with the most advanced technology the war had produced: hyperspeed rail cannons, planetary siege weapons, adaptive cloaking fields, and self-learning AI-controlled war drones. They had built weapons that even the Dominion could not counter. And they had come to use them. The attack began in the dead of space, far beyond the planetary defenses. The HFY Revenant, the warship that had become the symbol of humanity's rise, led the charge. Alongside it, hundreds of warships emerged from the void, their hulls painted in dark, unyielding metal, their weapons glowing with raw, destructive energy. They did not come in silence. They broadcast a single message to every Zorvax channel, a voice that sent fear through the once proud Dominion: your rule ends today. The first wave struck like a thunderstorm. Zorvax battle stations erupted in flames before they could react, their shields collapsing under the relentless barrage. The Dominion fleet scrambled to intercept, but they were already broken, already outmatched. Human warships moved with terrifying speed, their weapons cutting through Zorvax hulls as if they were made of paper. There was no mercy, no hesitation. This was not a battle, it was an execution. Zorvax admirals, once confident in their superiority, screamed for reinforcements that would never arrive. Their empire was already in ruins. There was nowhere left to run. Then came the ground invasion. Thousands of human drop pods rained down on Vorexal's surface, cutting through the planet's last remaining defenses. Elite human soldiers, enhanced by years of war, stormed them. In the heart of the Zorvax command citadel, The High Chancellor, the last ruler of the Dominion, stood surrounded by the shattered remains of his empire. The war room that had once displayed the galaxy under Zorvak's control now showed only red, every stronghold lost, every fleet destroyed, every hope shattered. He had never feared anything before. But now, as he heard the distant echoes of explosions, as he watched his guards fall to unseen enemies, he knew what it meant to be hunted. The doors blasted open, and there, standing in the smoke, was Admiral Ethan Graves, the man who had led humanity from the ashes to vengeance. The Chancellor tried to speak, to bargain, to plead, but Graves raised his weapon without a word. A single shot ended the Zorvak's rule forever. As the Dominion's flag fell, as their last leaders were wiped from existence, the message spread across the stars. The war was over. The galaxy, once dominated by the Zorvaks, now belonged to humanity. No longer the hunted, no longer the survivors, they were now the rulers of a new age. And they had not forgotten what had been done to them. Every race that had once bowed to the Dominion now looked to their new masters, wondering what would come next. Would humanity be merciful? Or would they become the new tyrants of the galaxy? Ethan Graves stood on the scorched balcony of the fallen Zorvak's palace, looking over the ruined capital. The battle was won, but war had changed them all. There was no going back to what they once were. Humanity had become something new. And as the stars shined above the battlefield, he knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. The war was over. The Zorvak's Dominion, once the most powerful empire in the galaxy, was nothing more than a memory burned away, erased from existence, buried beneath the might of humanity. What had started as a desperate fight for survival had transformed into something much greater. Humanity had not just avenged Earth, they had conquered the stars. Every enemy fleet had been dismantled, every stronghold had fallen, and every world that once lived in fear of the Dominion now looked up to the new rulers, the ones who had risen from the ashes. But even as the last echoes of war faded, one truth remained unshaken: this was only the beginning. The galaxy had never seen an empire like this before. Humanity did not rule like the Zorvaks, who had crushed all opposition through brute force and terror. Nor did they act like the old, failing civilizations that had cowered in the shadow of the Dominion. They ruled with precision, strategy, and unbreakable will. The worlds that had once been slaves were now under human protection, but there was no illusion of equality. Humanity had won, and those who wished to survive knew their place. The fleets that had once fought for survival now patrolled the darkest edges of space, hunting down any last remnants of Zorvak's resistance and ensuring that no new threat would ever rise against Earth's children again. The center of it all was Admiral Ethan Graves, the man who had led the final charge against the Dominion. He stood on the bridge of the HFY Revenant, no longer just a warship, but the flagship of the greatest fleet ever assembled. The stars stretched endlessly before him, not as an unknown void, but as a kingdom. The remaining species of the galaxy had learned to fear humanity, and in that fear, they had also found order. The law of the stars was now written by those who had proven themselves strongest, by those who had fought, bled, and sacrificed everything. And no one dared challenge them. But ruling the stars was not the same as winning a war. The Dominion had fallen, but the galaxy still burned with conflict. There were planets in chaos, lawless factions trying to take advantage of the power vacuum, and whispers of old enemies plotting in the darkness. Humanity could not afford to rest. There was still work to be done. The fleet moved like a storm, crushing pirate lords who thought they could rise, silencing rebellious governors who dreamed of power. Every enemy was wiped out before they could become a threat. Every challenge was met with overwhelming force. And with every victory, humanity's rule became more absolute. The new capital of this vast empire was no longer Earth. The planet had been lost long ago, reduced to ashes by the Zorvaks. But humanity was no longer bound to a single world. They had moved beyond such limitations. The new seat of power was Erebus Prime, a world reforged from the remains of a former Zorvak stronghold. A planet that had once symbolized oppression now stood as the beating heart of the human empire. Its cities were built from war, its streets filled with those who had survived the hardest battles, and its sky was never without the presence of human warships. But not all were willing to accept this new rule. In the shadows, secret forces conspired. The few surviving Zorvax warlords, the remnants of lesser empires that had once bowed to the Dominion, and even some of humanity's former allies feared what they had created. They whispered of rebellion, of resistance, of striking back before it was too late. They did not understand that it was already too late. Humanity had spent too long in war, had sacrificed too much to allow weakness to return to the stars. When word of a rebellion reached Admiral Graves, he did not hesitate. He did not offer diplomacy. He crushed them before they could even begin. One by one, their hidden bases were uncovered, their fleets destroyed before they could gather strength. The lesson was made clear: resistance was not an option. Some wondered if humanity would become the very thing they had fought against. The Zorvax had ruled with fear, and now so did the new empire. But there was a difference. The Dominion had ruled for themselves, enslaving, exploiting, and feeding their own hunger for power. Humanity ruled for control, for stability, for survival. They had learned the greatest lesson of war: true peace could only be achieved through absolute power. As the years passed, the new empire solidified its grip. The great human fleet expanded, pushing further into the unknown, ensuring that no hidden threats remained. Entire star systems were brought under control, civilizations either swearing loyalty or vanishing into history. There was no room for hesitation, no space for weakness. The galaxy was humanity's domain now, and under their rule, there would be no second rise of another dominion, no return to the chaos of the past. Admiral Graves stood once more at the edge of the Revenant's command deck, watching as yet another system fell into place under human rule. He had led the war, he had crushed their enemies, and now he led an empire that would never fall. His people had survived the unthinkable, had risen from the brink of extinction to claim what was theirs. The stars, once thought to be endless and untouchable, now belonged to them. Humanity had conquered the void, and now they ruled the stars.